if you sincerely want to create deeper levels of connection and awareness, the first step to that process is really recognizing that, what you don't know, and being comfortable with that, and inviting other people into that recognition.
Welcome back to the Max Out Show, where today I'm excited to speak to Lorenz Sell, co-founder of Sutra, who's on a mission to transform the way that we learn, collaborate, and connect online. So Lorenz, welcome to the show.
Max, it's great to be here. Thank you for
I'm
having
super
me.
excited to have you, and I want to first take you on a little bit of a time travel. That's, for our listeners, most of, usually how we start this. And I want to go back to the year 2007, when your interest in human connection really took off. So can you share with us that story of Burning Man and how that first inspired you to think of human connection?
Wow, you're going way back there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's true. A lot of who I am today and a lot of the work that I do today is heavily inspired by Burning Man. And it's hard to say exactly, like, what about it, but there's something that emerged for me in terms of really discovering what's possible at a very deep level of authenticity, in a space where there's no judgment, where there's what they call radical self-expression, and also radical creativity, and really discovering what's possible, when not just one person is doing it, but when 70,000 people are doing it. And there's something, I think there's so much that's amazing about Burning Man, but one of the things that's really amazing there is that on one level it's sheer chaos, and on another level it's absolutely harmonious. And you have billionaires, you have hippies, you have people from all walks of life, and somehow they all converge into this space that is just lawless, and yet for the most part it really works. And it's not like you can take that and say, well, the whole world should be like that. But part of what really affected me and influenced me was the question of, like, what can you distill from that? What can you learn from that and how can you bring more of that spirit? There's a very deep rawness, a very deep humanity that emerges, after like when you go to Burning Man, it's a 7-day experience. And by the time you get to day 5 or day 6, day 7, like, something is different. Something shifts within you, within the people around you. There's a depth to the eye contact, there's a depth to the presence, and it's life-changing. That's why people are so, like, religious about Burning Man. It's because you have a direct experience of something that is truly life-changing. And so one of the things that really affected me out of that experience was just asking myself, like, what is it? How do we bring this like raw, deep, authentic humanity into everyday life? And that's basically affected it started the journey of the last 10 years of my life.
Yeah, it really sounds like that's what you've been trying to really re-engineer into daily life ever since. And I know you took a rather pragmatic approach in beginning with the beer and business in Hawaii. So can you share with us a little bit about how do you get this started, and how's that evolved ever since?
Well, my time in Hawaii was kind. I guess it was at the beginning of this, and it's funny you mentioned that event. I've always had this thing around bringing people together. And so when I was one of my first startups was called I Love Photos, and we raised $6 million to build a photo platform that used facial recognition to automatically organize photos. And at that time, one of my side things was doing a networking event, like a basic startup networking event, bringing people together. And I mean, it's so fun. I don't know. You must have done some great research here, because that's like way back. That's way back. But it's also really interesting, how things build on themselves to really bring you to where you are, today. And one of the things that I've often done throughout my startup career over the last 20 years is bring people together in one way or another. And there's something about, when you're bringing people together, whether you're bringing together 100 people or 10 people or just like a dinner, there's something about, as a host, your responsibility, your capacity to really host that space, to kind of create the fluidity of that space, so that there's real connection, meaningful interaction, so that there's value for everybody, there's good conversation, so that it feels comfortable. And I'm just discovering this right now as we speak, kind of threading that back, because after Beer and Business, we did a whole bunch of meetups. I used to run this kind of philosophy discussion group called the Wisdom of Love, and we would have 10 to 20 people show up in our living room once a week to have a discussion about love as a philosophy. Like, what does it mean in the context of racial justice or social justice, or whatever, like really kind of pragmatic and practical. But again, it's a bunch of strangers coming together, and then how do you lubricate that space? How do you really get the connection? And because people come together, there's usually some awkwardness, there's some reservation, some guardedness, and then as a host, I feel like or you could call it whether it's a host or a facilitator, there's some nuances there, but one of your responsibilities is to navigate that space and invite a level of comfort and authenticity and vulnerability and connection, so that really opens up. And one of the things that I realized over the last 5 years of really going deep into this work with online learning is that the last 20 years of my life, where I had been doing this in one way or another, really informed my understanding of how to create connection online. So between Burning Man and between just bringing people together, there was something there that it was just kind of implicit, but now as this work has evolved, it's become more explicit as far as really kind of deconstructing what I just kind of subconsciously knew into really being able to do this kind of work online.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. And to me, it really looks like you sort of predicted COVID long before anybody else, in the sense
I
that
definitely
you're
did not
working
predict
on
it.
no, in the sense that you're working on these challenges, right? Of
Mm.
connecting really people online. Now that the whole world is into it, or has been into it for the last 2 years, but you've been working on it for the last 5, 6 years now already with Sutra. So you've been really into that field. So where do you see sort of the biggest challenges? You talked about inviting people into your living room. That is a very much different environment, obviously, than hosting a Zoom call and talking to strangers sitting on the other side of the world. So where do you see the specific challenges right now that people are facing, through COVID, or really probably for the rest of our lives, and really connecting with people online, and also some of the opportunities that we have maybe now for the first time ever?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think in some ways, COVID is just exacerbating or catalyzing certain things that are really that aren't necessarily about COVID or about being forced to be online. It's really this question of connection and awareness, and our capacity to be deeply present with ourselves and each other and the world that we live in. And so I had an experience about in 2011 at Burning Man that really changed my life. um, Best way I can describe it is I had a mystical experience, and it really brought this question of world peace into my consciousness. It really, like, how the best way I can describe it is it gave me a visceral experience, like almost a direct experience of living in a planet in peace, and it really affected me. And so a lot of my journey over the last 10 years has been really trying to understand what does peace mean, and how do how can you be in service of that. And so one of the things that really emerged for me, and maybe this is I call this like my radically simplified formula, is that when you have interaction at a sufficiently deep level of awareness, peace is inevitable, right? And it sounds so like simple, it's almost ridiculous, but there's something there about, when you have awareness between people, connection is inevitable. When I have like a deep awareness of myself and a presence of myself and a deep awareness or a continually deepening awareness of you, right? Because that, that's a never ending spectrum there. What can I have in my awareness about you? How can I truly get to know you and discover you and be present with you, and accept all of what there is, with you and between us. That is a never ending journey. But if I can recognize that, first of all, that is a never ending journey, and hold in that journey a certain humility, of what I do not know, and also recognizing the assumptions that inevitably I will make as a human being, because it's inevitable that I will have assumptions and judgments and a certain, I call this a subtle arrogance, but just noticing that about my human conditioning. If I can hold all of that, in my awareness as I get to know you, and as any two people or group of people get to know each other, right, then something new becomes possible. Then we have this opportunity for transformation. It might sound like a really tall order, but we're talking about something kind of really, really simple. Is just like a genuine intention for presence, right? Because again, it's an infinite thing. So it's not like I'm present or I'm not. It's literally, there's an infinite spectrum of what I can be present to within myself and in my environment and in the people that I encounter. And so the question for me, like pre-COVID or during COVID or post-COVID, is really, how do you cultivate this capacity for deeper relational presence, right? Deeper presence with yourself and another person. And not just in the context of like, oh, I'm going to learn to meditate, right? Because there's a lot of it, like mindfulness is learning to meditate, but it's really, I'd say it's like, oh, you can call it meditation 2.0. It's applied meditation, applied mindfulness in the context of, a relational space. And so one of the things that emerged for us in our work with this question was really an understanding that one way to do this, and I'm sure there's many, one way to do this is through group learning experiences. Is that you can, this kind of capacity presence isn't something you like read about and you just like how to do it. It's a never ending practice, and you need other people to practice with. And so one way to create an opportunity for that practice is to create a learning experience around any subject, right? Not just about mindfulness or about presence. It could be about marketing, or it could be about permaculture, or it could be about Ayurveda, any kind of thing, right? That it's, you have the content that gives people the reason. Like, people need a reason to come together. They need a reason to invest their time and energy into something, right? We live in a world where people are very busy. There's a certain amount of scarcity. People are always like kind of working towards something. And so if there's a practical reason for them to do something, it gives them the motivation to stick with it. So a learning experience, it really offers a perfect container for that. It offers people something that's very practical, and but the way that you structure that learning experience, the way of being that you invite, the quality of presence and connection and conversation that you create around that experience can give people an opportunity to both learn the content and develop this capacity. And in the process of that, actually deepen their understanding and relationship with the content. Because through that quality of connection and conversation, there's also an opportunity to understand the content much more deeply through each other. And so this has really become the heart of the work that we do today.
Wow, so it really sounds like this awareness and this presence serves as you so beautifully called it, this lubricant that makes all kind of content, learning and connections so much more effective, because people truly tune into what you're saying and to the presence between each other, and they're not so much checked out. And so what are these underlying principles then? You called it meditation 2.0. So what does that look like in this relational space, as we try to increase our awareness of both ourselves and then also each other in that space?
Yeah, I think so. It's a complex territory, and I think this is really one of the first things that we start with is that there isn't like a one size fits all answer. And I think this is really one of the biggest challenges that I had to realize as well, is that all of this work is going to be different depending on the context, depending on the environment, depending on the group of people. And so one, I'd say the first principle that we work with is really an understanding that it's an emergent experience, right? That this is something that's going to emerge as it goes, and that the way to step into that emergence is through prototyping. Is really to start with an intention for an outcome, that we want to develop deeper levels of awareness and connection in the context of this course or this community or this organization, and we don't know how to do that, right? And that's that not knowing is actually okay. It's actually the beginning of the journey into discovery. This is I really love this concept of humility. Humility is kind of a willingness to not know, and a recognition of where we make assumptions. And so really bringing this humility, that if you sincerely want to create deeper levels of connection and awareness, the first step to that process is really recognizing that what you don't know, and being comfortable with that, and inviting other people into that recognition. And so whether, for example, when we started our transformational teaching online course, there was kind of like this really meta experience. It's actually continued now. We have over, we have several hundred graduates. We've done 6 cohorts, but each cohort is really kind of similarly structured in that it's a inquiry into how do we create deeper levels of awareness and connection in the context of an online learning experience. So there's part of it is our understanding, but really it's like the question is the answer. Like the question, asking the question, it's kind of like this big question of like, who am I? And it doesn't necessarily have this answer, I am this. It's more asking that question over and over and living into whatever answers might emerge. So that's I'd say that's one like foundational principle. And another aspect of it is really embodiment, is really developing a deeper sensitivity to physical sensation, a deeper presence and awareness of physical sensation. And so in any given moment, you can just notice your body. Notice how your legs feel. Notice your pelvic region, your abdominal region, your chest, your throat, your head, and maybe notice your pulse. Just notice the sensation of aliveness in your body. And in a relational context, this is really powerful, because it's kind of like the ground zero of presence. As I'm present with myself, then I can begin to be present with you, and I can begin to also notice how the experience of you shows up in my body. How I can and this happens all the time. One of the first times I began to notice this kind of thing was years ago, actually, when I lived in Hawaii, where my whole life I've struggled with self-consciousness and just feeling kind of tense around people. And so I began to notice these sensations as they would come up in my body when I was talking to somebody, and just that noticing and then relaxing into them. And another kind of stage to that if the environment is set up for it, is really an invitation to share that, to speak it, which is, if you think about intimacy, we're talking about like connection, which, real connection is about intimacy. You can think of, like, you might have a Facebook group where there's a lot of activity, a lot of people posting, but is there any real connection there? Do people really care? Do they actually know something about each other? So we're talking about meaningful, authentic human connection where I know you, there's a certain intimacy there. And, one of the most intimate things that is present for us that we almost never share is physical sensation, is what's coming up for me, any tension, or, what just might be coming up in my thoughts or my emotions, or my sensations. And so one way to open up a space of surprising connection is to really create an opportunity for people to first take a moment of stillness, to just settle in, because we're in this like go digital environment, and you jump from one Zoom call to the next, to my email, to the nonstop, right? So if you say, whether it's in person, or maybe we just talk about the online, kind of in an online environment on a Zoom call, is to take a moment of pause, to just settle down, notice your space, notice yourself in your space, and then also create an opportunity to notice and to share. This works better if you have a large group. You can do breakout groups, or if you have a smaller group of 5 to 10, you can take a moment for everybody to share. But one of the things that does is it opens up a space of deep authenticity, because there's nothing more authentic than me sharing what's really present for me, and particularly in my body, and intimacy. It's very intimate. I don't even realize how intimate it is, but it's like the closest thing to me, and so it's surprising how something so simple can really create an opening for deeper connection. And then, kind of bringing back what I just said about the prototyping, so that kind of creates the container, and then the prototyping is, maybe working with different activities, and there's hundreds of activities that you can try to somehow open, from icebreakers to different sensing activities to different innovation activities, to then open up both a space of kind of a generative space, and a space of connection and awareness.
Wow, so it sounds like you're really trying to take people out of their heads, out of this constant loop of overthinking about other stuff, and you're already thinking about the next event and the next lunch, and that pain in my toe, to really being fully alive and fully present in this very moment, so you can truly connect and show up fully when it matters most. So what is it really that you're trying to establish? Is it like, sort of these feelings like I mentioned, like the pain in my toe, or sort of the
That's a
breathing?
good
Is
thing,
it sort of,
really being
emotions? Like
really
what?
being really being present to the pain in your toe,
Yeah, right. But breathing usually is pretty useful.
Yeah, but it really, I mean, we're talking about something really simple, right? And there's infinite ways to complicate it, but we're really talking about presence and awareness, right? As the ground zero for connection and meaningful interaction, but particularly in a relational context. I think that's the subtle nuance here, right? Because there's presence and awareness and mindfulness, say, in the context of meditation, which is a more of a inward type of activity, and then in a relational context, it's both inward and outward at the same time. It's both that I'm inwardly present to and aware of my internal space, and that I'm outwardly present to you, and that there in that space there's an ongoing there's an ongoing process that's going on, and the capacity to be in that space is is an ongoing practice. You know, it's and I think that's really what we're talking about is um, creating opportunity for that practice, because there's two things here. One is the discovery of what I'm talking about, and two is the practice. So I can talk about something like deep listening and say, you know, deep listening is super amazing, it's profound, it can change your life. And for somebody who has never really experienced deep listening, it's meaningless. It's just like, yeah, I listen all the time. I'm at home, I'm listening to Netflix, I'm listening to my partner, I'm listening to my kids. I just do it. Right? It doesn't seem that special. There's nothing. Why? If I were to say deep listening is the ultimate superpower, it doesn't sound that impressive. It's like, I don't know. I'd rather be able to fly and shoot lasers out of my eyes. So the first part is the discovery, right? To really have a direct experience of this kind of relational space, to really have a discovery of deep listening as a full bodied kind of experience of receiving. And so once and kind of going back to the Burning Man thing, I think that's one of the things that happens at Burning Man is you discover something that you don't realize is there in the context of human connection. There's something you discover, and it's very difficult to describe in say like this on a podcast, because if I could just describe it and kind of convey it, then there'd be no reason for anyone to go to Burning Man. But what makes it so special and unique, and what it is that you have to experience it to understand it. You have to experience. So there's something, and Burning Man's kind of like this big thing, but I'm also just talking about deep listening, embodied presence. You have to kind of experience it to get it, to get that there's a there. And once you get it, then there's something to practice, and to and it's a practice for me right now with you on a Zoom call. I'm practicing kind of looking between you on the video, and so I can see you, and then looking into the camera lens so that I look better, when this is being played on YouTube. But there's an awareness of that, right? That's something I'm dealing with. And then there's a practice of kind of continually coming back to my body, coming back to you, coming back to our conversation, holding that space of awareness. And so that's just a practice that's always there. But then creating intentional space for practice, which kind of comes back to creating a learning experience where there's a safe container created that really invites the deepening of this practice, that then you can carry into your interaction with the storekeeper, with your partner, with your kids, with your family. It's harder to practice in those environments sometimes. There's a lot going on. You have your phone, you have all these things going on, and so having an intentional space opportunity to practice then helps you carry that into everywhere else where you might apply that practice.
There's so many great nuggets of wisdom here that I want to dissect a little bit. First of all, what you mentioned about the sort of new benchmarking of experience really is fascinating to me, right? The way I often look at it is I can tell you all about my favorite cake, right? I can describe to you the ingredients, I can describe to you the color, but until I, come to Berlin and actually hand it over to you, you will never actually know what this cake is like. And the same is for, all of these principles that you just talked about, right? People can't understand deep listening. They can't understand, what it's really like to feel, loved and grateful and excited on top of the world if they've never actually experienced these things. And so, like you say, it is a very hard thing to describe, and yet when you feel it, you know it's there, right? You know exactly what it feels like the moment you actually experience it. And so I want to dive a little bit deeper into this act of creating safe spaces that you just talked about, and the fact that you can go out into the world and you can do this at the local supermarket, you can do this with your family and your friends. And so what do you see as sort of these underlying principles of really creating a space that allows people, to sort of feel invited into that space, to feel invited to open up and share about them. Because, as you mentioned, before, you're thinking a lot about world peace and what it really takes for people to open up and be vulnerable and connect. And yet we live in a world where oftentimes that's so hard, right? Because, we're meeting these strangers, we don't really know their intentions, we don't really know if, like you, they're driven by love and by connection, or maybe by ulterior motives. So what have you learned really about allowing people to become more vulnerable and really open themselves up?
Hmm. Yeah, I think this is really something that that starts with the person who wants that. Whether you're the instructor or the community builder or whoever, or the space holder, that it's something you really have to model, so that other people, I guess you could say, feel inspired to also do that. And it's a delicate territory, because again, this is so different in every context and every environment. Whether we're talking about one-on-one, like with a close friend or a partner, or you're talking about a small group, or you're running a course, or you're talking about a community. There's so many layers and nuances to how you create a space. It's very much, this is the thing about it. It's a living thing, and that's both what makes it so powerful and so you know difficult to grasp. You have to be willing to be with that unknown. There isn't like a formula for it. And so, kind of coming back to this thing about prototyping, I think this is really where, like, when I say prototyping, I don't necessarily mean something that is really complex. Like a prototype can be very, very simple. It can happen between you and your wife when you kind of in you maybe there's, I'll give a really simple example. Let's say there's like often a conflict that arises between you and somebody that's close to you. So a prototype can be that that this conflict will likely come up again in some given situation. And a prototype might be, okay, next time this comes up, I'm going to try to respond differently, and I'm just going to observe what happens when I do that, right? And so there is an opportunity to learn, rather than be caught up in what happens. There's an opportunity to learn, to see what happens. And so similarly with a group of people, if you're trying to really understand, how do you create real connection, right? Real connection is authenticity. And when you're talking about authenticity, that means it's unpredictable, right? Because it's authentic. It's unpredictable. And so it's because it's authentic. And that there's also, there's a lot of implications to what happens when you invite authenticity. So first is just, how do you do that? And it really starts with modeling it yourself. It really starts with speaking to the fact that you may not be entirely sure how to do this, that there may be things that emerge that might be unexpected, and really kind of creating a container that welcomes and invites that, because that's part of the authenticity. And that when something does come up, that you deal with it as best you can, and you also kind of create space for yourself to not be perfect. That in the process really model that vulnerability that you want from other people. And again, the way that you do this, the language that you use to convey this, to talk about it, is going to be different. If you're in a corporate environment, or if you're in a community, or if you're in a small group, the way that you language these things are going to be different. But the essence, the heart of it, is really the same. Everybody wants authenticity, right? Everybody wants to feel, comfortable being themselves. Everybody wants to feel safe being themselves. Everybody wants to feel meaningful connection with others. There may be not used to those things. There may be in environments that just don't necessarily welcome or reward those things. But in essence, every human wants these basic things. And um, when there's an invitation for that, like a model, when someone's willing to go out on the line to kind of demonstrate these things, there's something that wakes up for people. They may not necessarily say, yes, that's what I want, but it touches them. They're like, this person's real. So whenever you encounter realness, it touches you. It wakes something up. So the question is, how do you bring that into your environment? And so what I'm saying is that the basic approach is to model it yourself, to recognize that it's a prototype, and to be willing to make mistakes. That when mistakes happen, there's an opportunity to learn, and there's an opportunity to be vulnerable. And when things go wrong, if it's well handled, that's when there's really the opportunity to create the connection. That's when people are like, there's an imperfection there, and people are like, oh, and there's an opportunity to come together to work through that together. So, obviously what we're talking about is very complex territory. But if I had to kind of synthesize it into some essential points, that would be that. And I'll add one more thing here, kind of speaking about the spectrum of authenticity. If you're inviting authenticity, it's important to recognize that at some level, authenticity can mean the surfacing of trauma, the surfacing of, kind of maybe shadow territory. This is part of the human condition. And so in an experience, whether it's in a community or an organization or a course, where you're inviting deeper levels of intimacy and deeper levels of authenticity, it's important to understand that road, at some level, if you're really inviting people to show up as they are, things come up, and that's really part of the process. That's really part of the journey. Is that it doesn't have to be a course about trauma. It doesn't have to be a course about psychotherapy. We're just talking about, how do you invite real humanity? Like, what does it mean if you really think about, like, the average person on the street, or yourself, what are you actually dealing with in your life? Like, most people are dealing with both, like, good stuff and really challenging stuff, and maybe challenging stuff from way, way back. It's part of the human condition. And if you create an experience that invites people to show up as they are, that can surface. And so one question might be like, why would I want to do that? Like, what does that have to do with this? And I think there's two things there. One is that when you invite people to show up as themselves, like at a deep, deep level, and they can relax and let go of all their shit and just be, that frees up a lot of energy. That frees up a lot of energy. Now so you can have this, like, amazing connection, joyfulness, presence, and get shit done and be creative. And so that's, it's really powerful. And then the other side of that is just like, real healing, real transformation, like really, like, supporting each other in becoming who we can be, and in creating a world that we all want to live in.
Wow, so it really sounds like it is sort of a delicate balancing act between intention on the one hand, and then sort of this detachment from the outcome on the other hand, meaning really setting sort of intentions and being clear about what we're trying to create. We're trying to really create a space of shared vulnerability, of openness, of true presence and awareness. And at the same time, we have to then let go of our expectations. We have to let go of perfection. We have to let go of our need to control everything meticulously like a machine, and instead have human error, have imperfections, have this ability for people to just change course and change direction a little bit, and bring their really, like you said, authentic selves into the conversation. So is that really what I'm getting here?
Yeah, and I think what you just described in a way is is the definition of emergent. We're talking about an emergent experience, and so it's it's coming together through the participation of the people. And I think in some way it's very foreign to how we like to operate. We like to operate like from school. There's an expert, they give us the information, we have to memorize it. There isn't necessarily a lot of room for emergence, for the teacher learning from the way that we interpret and process and understand the information through each other. And so there's something really rich there in that kind of like willingness to make mistakes, willingness to be imperfect. That's also about creating something new, right? Something new that isn't from the past, that isn't a version of what's already been done. And there's a balance there between the past and what wants to emerge, about how the past informs what wants to emerge, but doesn't constrain what wants to emerge. You want the past to inform the future. You don't want it to constrain the future. And part of that is a willingness to not know, a willingness to be imperfect, a willingness to make mistakes, so that you can discover the future together.
Yeah, now talking about mistakes, I'm always interested and fascinated by people's biggest fuck ups. So what's the biggest failure? Because they usually put in my story. So what's the biggest failure that you now are able to celebrate in your life? Really looking back in hindsight.
Every failure I've had has been a celebration, and has been has informed me who I am. I mean, I think one of the more interesting stories here. So yeah, I have this rich experience with failure. I mean, shortly after college, I started my first startup. I raised $6 million, and yeah, I was a 23-year-old kid who had no idea what he was doing. And that was, total disaster. Too many cooks in the kitchen. I had no idea how to work with people. I came out of that. This was in 2009. I was like, I've learned my startup mistakes. Now I know what I'm doing. And so I started another company. 2 years later, I was completely out of money. And so I moved into my car. And so I lived on the streets of San Francisco in my car. I had a big Ford Expedition. I lived in my car for 11 months just so that I could continue working on my startup, because I had enough. I could live off of my credit cards, and I could kind of like continue doing that. I couldn't afford rent, but I could do that, and I was like super committed to to not giving up. And that, and many people might say that that's like big failure. It was one of the most profound transformational experiences of my life. For one thing, and I'll share this. This is totally off key, but I don't know, for some reason I feel called to share this. Because I think it's an interesting thing about like evolving as a human being. One of the things that really transformed for me as a man in my car was my relationship with sexual energy. Because before that, I was kind of, always looking to chase after women or whatever. I'm sure there's less civil language I could use there, but when you're living in your car, you don't really have a place where you can bring girls back to.
You just try to crash this on the couch, really, huh?
So, but it really forced me to. It kind of opened up this opportunity for me to tame that beast, to kind of develop a different relationship with that sexual energy, and I don't know if that would have happened if I wasn't constrained in the environment of my car, So there was something there that really transformed me as a human being, of kind of like having to withdraw from kind of the normal like social interactions that you might have if you had your own place. And so after 11 months, I felt really called to move to New York City, and I was running out of credit card capacity. And so I called up one of my best friends from college, and I was like, "Hey, do you mind if I crash on your couch?" He lived in New York. And so I left San Francisco on like November 20th or so. It took me 4 days to get across. I got to New York on November 24th, basically the night before Thanksgiving. And this is such a beautiful story. So the last night that I spent in my car, I woke up in my car for the last time on Thanksgiving Day in the morning. That night, I was invited to a dinner party at another friend's house. And so two things happened on Thanksgiving Day. One is that I moved into my friend's place, who ended up being my wife. And
Wow.
and two is that I went to have dinner at another friend's place, a Thanksgiving dinner, where I met an investor who put 600K into my company.
Woohoo, wow. Sounds like the
So,
best day of your life.
but I mean, again, that company didn't work out, and it was, I made a million mistakes, and I learned a lot of things. So, and all of these failures have been such a blessing. I mean, really, I feel like today, I really try to bring that whenever something's difficult or something's challenging. I feel like the Jedi mind trick is really looking for what are you learning in the process, really recognizing that one day in the future you will look back and this may just be one of the highlights of your life. Like when I look back to living in my car, you can imagine at that time it was scary and very difficult.
Yeah.
But when I look back on it now, I was like, wow, like I was so free. I could drive anywhere. I learned so much. It was amazing. So in retrospect, it was a huge highlight. And in it was difficult, but in retrospect, huge highlight.
Wow, yeah, no, I totally believe. I had a similar experience 3 years ago. So it was only for 2 months, and it was a yoga mat at least in my shared office. But still, I had sort of a similar experience, right? Of sort of living on rock bottom, right? Like being considered a failure, considering myself even at times a total failure, right? Because I was just there, after midnight, after everyone had left the office, right? I was just brushing my teeth and sleeping on a yoga mat. And yet it was one of the most insightful and really in hindsight one of the greatest experiences of my life. And so I truly value you sharing all of that story, and I'm so glad about how it really turned out in the end on that New Year's, not New Year's, on that Thanksgiving dinner day then. And so we talked a lot of great strategies, ideas, tools, tips today. If you could give our listeners just one challenge or one action step to take away to become more present and more aware in their relationships, what would be that one thing?
Mm. Mm. Yeah, great question. So a lot of our work has been influenced by Otto Scharmer, and he has an organization called the Presencing Institute. He's a professor at MIT, and he has. If you actually go to their website, they have, I believe it's presencing.com or .org. They have a section with tools there, and they have one of them is like I forget exactly what it's called, like a listening assessment tool, and it's really simple. They have these 4 levels of listening. It's like downloading, factual, empathic, and generative, and they kind of describe what those are. And so I'd say that if you're really interested in understanding listening as more than just some basic function, that this is a really powerful place to start. The listening assessment tool, basically it describes these different levels of listening, and then the exercise is to track your listening throughout the day, to begin to notice the quality of listening that you bring to the different interactions. And I find this, when I was in my early 20s, I was really into bodybuilding, and at some point I was hardcore about calorie counting. So I would count like everything. And then this was in the early days of Twitter. I used to actually post this to Twitter. And I had a bunch of people be like, why are you posting this to Twitter? I'm going to unfollow you. But the thing about calorie counting, more than just like the fact that it maybe gets you to some sort of outcome, is that it creates awareness. And it's an awareness that you develop that lasts for the rest of your life, that you really begin to understand kind of like the nuances of what you're actually putting into your body, and and how that makes you feel. And so similarly, anything that you track and measure, it's not about doing that forever, but part of the process, and even though it can seem really annoying, is to develop that awareness, to begin to notice, the quality of listening that you bring into any particular interaction. So what I love about these levels of listening is that they're really well defined. They're really, it's really simple and you can really bring it into, every interaction you have. And as you do this for, even a few days or, a few weeks, it really begins to open up a deepening awareness of the quality of listening that you bring into your life. And I honestly, I do feel that listening is a superpower. And once you really discover what listening is, that ultimately that's the pathway to everything.
Sounds amazing. So where can people find you online?
So, as you mentioned, I'm the co-founder of Sutra. This is sutra.co. This is so it's basically a platform that is designed for group learning, support communities, anywhere where there's an emphasis on the quality of connection and conversation. That's Sutra. We also have a course called Transformational Teaching Online, and we're going to be launching the next cohort towards probably early spring, mid-spring, something like that, toward early May. We're going to be launching the next cohort of that, and that's at transformationalteaching.com. So yeah, such a pleasure to connect with you, Max. I really enjoyed our time together.
Likewise. Hey, thank you so much, Lorenz. Really enjoyed it.
All right, guys, that's it for today. I really hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope you gained some valuable ideas, tips, tools, tricks, mindsets, belief systems that will hopefully inspire you to take your life to the next level. At the end of the day, guys, it's all about application. The only thing that's going to set you apart tomorrow from where you are today is how much action you take with those ideas that you gained. And so I really want to challenge you at this point to, not just listen to this passively, to not just consume this, passively, just think about other things, but to really take those lessons, take those ideas that you just gained and start applying them to your lives, to really start taking action and sprinting towards those goals and those dreams that you have in your life. Now, guys, at this point, I want to ask you for a huge favor. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider heading over to iTunes and leaving a review, as that helps me really grow the show and reach more people, impact even more people around the world. If you have a family member, friend, a loved one maybe, that you think could benefit from this content, please consider, sharing it with them, forwarding to them, as that helps us really build a community of like-minded people that are all about maxing out their lives. Now, guys, with that being said, thanks so much for tuning in today. I really, really appreciate it. Stay strong and see you tomorrow.